Ahead and end the poll. Okay. So it looks like the first question was, what do you currently have in your yard? 22% lawn, 33% said drought tolerant garden, 11% said empty, and 33% said other. I'm curious what the other is. Question number 2, how comfortable are you with insects? Looks like the majority here are very comfortable. Happy to hear that. Juanita and I love bugs. We have 33% that said neutral, 22% said not comfortable. Question number 3, why are you interested in attracting pollinators? It looks like almost everyone here supports the environment, and that's why they want to attract pollinators, increase biodiversity, and learn more about them. Question 4, where do you need the most help when attracting pollinators? Looks like the majority of everyone said not sure which plants are best. So I'm sure Juanita will cover that tonight, and hopefully walking away from this presentation, you will know which plants are best. Number 5, what type of environment did you grow up in? It looks like the majority here, folks are from the city, some suburbs, and even less rural. Question 6, where are you joining from? Mostly everyone's joining from another Bay Area city tonight, some from Sunnyvale. And how did you hear about this webinar? Most said Bosca's website, and some through Facebook and Nextdoor. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Izzy from the city of Sunnyvale, and I will be moderating tonight's program. Along with our co-sponsor Bosca and our instructor Juanita Salisbury, I want to welcome you all to our class. Before we begin the program, I'm going to go over some guidelines for successful participation in the webinar. First, all attendees are muted by default to reduce background noise to the presentation. For tonight's class, we ask that you save any questions that you might have for the end of the presentation. If you would like to ask a question, you can do so in 2 ways. The first option is to use the raise hand feature. I will then call upon you and ask to unmute you. The second option is to type your question in the Q&A. I will then read questions to the instructor or respond directly in the chat. And as you can see, these illustrations show you where to find the raise hand button and the Q&A button. I'd also like to note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on Bosca's website. Now that we have that out of the way, I'd like to share a little background information on Bosca's landscape education program. Bosca is a special district that represents the interests of 26 cities, water districts, and private water companies, all of which purchase wholesale water from the San Francisco Regional Water Supply. Bosca member agencies collectively serve over 1.8 million residents and 40,000 businesses in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Alameda counties. Bosca's goal is to ensure a reliable supply of high-quality water at a fair price for our agencies and their customers. Consistent with that goal, Bosca provides a regional water conservation program to support our agencies in improving water use efficiency. The landscape education program is one element of that conservation program. While we have made significant strides in our water use efficiency in the past decade, there is still more room for improvement. Outdoor water use represents the single largest untapped opportunity for water conservation in the Bosca service area. Outdoor water use reduction through the use of water-efficient plants and innovative techniques can help conserve water and ensure that future water supply needs of our communities are met. A few highlights on additional conservation programs that may be of interest to you. Valley Water has several rain barrel rebate options, as you can see here. You can get up to $35 for installing a rain barrel, 50 cents a gallon for installing a cistern, and $1 per square foot of a rain garden. Bosca has a newly redesigned landscape rebate program, which provides rebates to customers of participating water agencies for replacing water-intensive lawn space with water-efficient landscaping. Bosca also has the I Heart Gray Water program, which gives residents up to $200 in rebates for connecting a washing machine to a gray water irrigation system. Next, there's the Bosca Lawn Be Gone rebate, which gives residents various rebates for transforming their lawns and making them more water efficient. A new addition for Bosca is the Smart Controller program, which provides instant rebates and heavily discounted pricing on purchase of the Ratio 3 irrigation controller. This controller can be operated on your smartphone and normally retails for $280. Through this program, customers of participating water agencies can purchase a controller for $100 plus tax. For more information or to find out which of these programs are available in your area, visit bayareaconservation.org. The City of Sunnyvale encourages you to participate in rebate programs offered by Valley Water. We offer $2 per square foot of rebates for replacing your lawns and plants that require a lot of water with drought-tolerant plants or permeable hardscape. We also offer up to $200 in rebates for properties that connect a clothes washer to a gray water irrigation system. In order to qualify for these programs or rebates, please make sure that you apply first. A common mistake is that residents get very excited about the rebates and start transforming their lawn before making sure that they qualify. Also, are you looking for compost? Free compost and mulch are available for Sunnyvale residents at the Smart Station. Stop by Monday through Sunday, 8 a.m. To 5 p.m. with your own shovel and container. One of our most popular programs is our landscape rebate program. We will give you a rebate for taking out your inefficient lawn and putting in a low water using landscape. San Jose municipal customers qualify for up to $2 per square foot. California native landscapes and water-wise landscapes need 1 to 3 years of water to establish, and then they may not need any water except during the hottest summers or driest winters. This is a good project to start now while we hope that the next winter is also wet. Also, with the same application, you can apply for efficient irrigation equipment, including inline drip irrigation, smart irrigation controllers, and rain sensors, so your system only turns on when your plants need it to. Additional information on water-wise gardening can be found on southbaygreengardens.org, where they also have some landscape designs and templates as well. It's a great way to get some ideas before you go ahead and apply for those rebates. This here is a snapshot of the Water-Wise gardening website. It provides resources to support residents in water-efficient landscape renovations and management. Resources include a gallery of gardens with plants identified, plant selection tool, and even a watering calculator. If you enjoyed tonight's program, we invite you to check out our upcoming webinar classes. The last class is happening this Sunday, May 5th. There's still time to sign up if you are interested. If you have questions about the rebate programs, please contact Valley Water for more information. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing our instructor, Juanita Salisbury. After growing up in the rural Willamette Valley in Oregon, Juanita Salisbury studied psychology in college, eventually receiving a PhD in biopsychology from the University of Florida. Later, she obtained a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture from West Virginia University. In 2009, she established Juanita Salisbury Landscape Architecture after working for commercial and residential design firms. In 2016, she established the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, the first of 8 California native plant habitats in Palo Alto. Her focus is to research and educate about these habitats, as well as exploring opportunities to install more of them. Juanita, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'll go ahead and stop sharing so that you can take it away.
Thank you, Izzy.
Thank you.
All right, let's get it started. And there we go. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Juanita Salisbury, as Izzy said, and I am a California licensed landscape architect, and I do manage several pollinator gardens here in Palo Alto, and I try to record those maintenance visits and observation visits on Facebook and Instagram. And the name that you can find me under is the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, and also YouTube Primrose Way. If you're not into social media, you can check out the website primrosewaypollinatorgarden.com, and that will show you a map of our gardens, this very map here. And this will show you where you can see native plants and habitats here in Palo Alto. They're always open, they're free. And as you come into Palo Alto on Embarcadero Road, going west, there are several. The first garden, the Primrose Way Garden, on the north side of Embarcadero Road. And this garden is going to be connected to the Gwynda Street Garden via the Embarcadero Road Pollinator Corridor project, which we're in the process of installing. There's the Hopkins Avenue Garden, Arcadia Place Garden, the Island Drive Garden, and then the Churchill and the West Greenwich Place Gardens. And they're great places to go to see plants all year long, to see how they look during the winter, the summer, the spring, and the fall. And they're very pleasant too. They're nice and fragrant, and there's generally something winged flying around in them. So tonight I'm going to talk about insects and plants. So we're going to talk about, first of all, keystone species, because that's really key to understanding how to get success in terms of supporting the species. We're going to talk about pollinators. We're going to talk about the plants that they use and those plants in a habitat, and then best practices to really optimize the effect of pollinator plants. And I do try to liven up my slides with the observations that I've made pretty much weekly for the last 8 years over these gardens. And here we have an Anthidium bee and a Phacelia bolanderi, one of the great nectar species for bees. So let's talk about keystone species. And here we have a beautiful green iridescent bee nectaring on an aster. And bees are a keystone species. What is a keystone species? So for both plants and animals, a keystone species plays a pivotal role in an ecosystem. Without it, the entire ecosystem would be dramatically different or might even cease to exist. These species have low functional redundancy, meaning that no other species can fully replace their ecological niche. The takeaway insight from that is when you support multiple keystone species, both plants and animals, you provide high functional redundancies to protect ecosystem stability. So what we mean by low functional redundancy is that you need backups to, if something fails, have a fail-safe, have a backup plan, or have a backup plant or species of bee or that you support or plant. So if you support multiple keystones, then you have backup systems if you're thinking in terms of a systems approach. And bees are definitely a keystone species. Some of the benefits of supporting keystone species, both, again, plants and animals, is that when you support a keystone species, you have an amplified impact. So those keystone species have a disproportionate impact on the overall health and diversity of an ecosystem compared to their abundance. So relatively few species are hugely important. So they might be small, but their effects are huge. In terms of connection, they act as connectors in the environment, creating a ripple effect of connections throughout the environment. So keystone species connect to a lot of other kinds of species, both plant and animal. The framework that they provide, the behavior of both plants and insects benefits a variety of both plant and animal species. So they kind of create a structure upon which these interactions and relationships can occur. let's talk about pollinators. And here I've got a picture of a small bee chowing down on a Calochortus luteus. That's a bulb that we have here in California. And you can see here the mouth parts there. She's pulling the pollen off of that piece of the flower to collect it on her leg there so she can take it back to the nest. But what are pollinators? A pollinator is an organism that moves pollen, okay, from the male part of a flower to the female part. This causes fertilization of the flower to produce seeds. The majority of pollinators are insects, bees mostly, and we have 1,600 species of bees in California. We're not talking about honeybees, we're talking about everything from bumblebees to leafcutter bees to um, sweat bees, all kinds of different bees. They do most of the work, but other insects such as butterflies, moths, beetles, flies, wasps, and ants pollinate incidentally. A few animals, such as hummingbirds and bats, etc., also pollinate incidentally. And pollinators are super important because 87% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants require pollinators to set seed. Plants in the environment thus reflect the pollinators that are present, whereas butterflies and moths reflect the plants that are present. So you get more plants with pollinators that are spreading the seeds around, and then butterflies and moths, because they feed on those plants, will tell you what is in that environment because of the host plants. And we know that without pollinators, we're going to lose about 90% of the plants on the planet. And speciation of plants occurs more rapidly with pollinators. And speciation just means when you have changes in color and form, things like that. So when you have insects moving around the pollen rather than being wind pollinated, which is very random, but very specifically going from flower to flower, you can have these different morphologies and different color forms evolve more quickly. So that speciation is basically sped up by having something that will facilitate the moving of the genes around. So pollinator function, here we have this flower here, that's Clarkia unguiculata, with a big, beautiful carpenter bee. She's one of the largest bees in North America, if not the largest. And they really like Clarkia unguiculata. But let's talk about function. The function of bees is to spread the genetic diversity of the plants in the environment. That's what pollination is, spreading that genetic diversity around. And so think of bees as farmers whose function in the environment is to spread genetic diversity of plants for other insects to eat. The function thus supports that diversity upon which other animals and insects depend. And because of the dependence on the function of pollinators, that makes bees a keystone species. And how effective they are on being pollinators depends on a lot of different things. Their ability to carry pollen, the grooming habits of bees, their foraging behavior, their body size and shape, their tongue length, long versus short, and whether they are generalist bees. And the scientific term for a generalist bee is polylectic, which means they visit a variety of flowers, although they typically visit one species at a time. So they can get their pollen and nectar from a lot of different kinds of flowers. Or if they are a specialist, and the scientific term there is oligolectic, visiting one species of flower at a time. And so those are just a few things that we think about when we talk about how effective they are. And so this just is a little animation showing that pollen, which is on this part of the flower here, is being collected by the bee. She's packing this onto her back leg, um, and she's actually nectaring on, this is Bombus vosnesenskii, the yellow-faced bumblebee, nectaring on Monardella villosa, and she's got pollen on her body that she then will groom into her pollen baskets there to carry back to the nest. And pollen contains those male genes of plants for fertilization and seed formation. So bees are super cool. Like Izzy said, she and I both really think insects are neat. And as I said, I've been observing these gardens for the last 8 years on almost a weekly basis. So I see all kinds of interesting things, and I'm never disappointed. And so the ability to carry pollen depends on grooming skills. And so here we have a bumblebee, and she is just showing off here. She is simultaneously hanging on with one leg here on the flower. So she's hanging by one leg. She's grooming pollen off of her antenna. Here's just her leg here. And she's covered in pollen. And then her middle legs are grooming the pollen off of her fur and then transferring it back to her wads of pollen and nectar that she's carrying back to the nest, which is incredible. So she's basically coordinating 6 legs to do a number of different functions. And she is covered in pollen that was released with her buzz pollination from Solanum xanthi, a native plant that we have here that's part of the nightshade family. That is what's called buzz pollinated. Pollen in some plant species needs to be released by vibrations that the bees make. And bumblebees are really good at that, carpenter bees as well. Honeybees don't do buzz pollination. And so things like tomatoes are buzz pollinated by bumblebees and other native bees in order to release the pollen from the male part of the flower. And bees and flowers go together in a very much like a love story. And so gardens with native plants seem to encourage other native plants to colonize. And so what I mentioned before is plants in the landscape are a function of the pollinators there. And so, for example, at the Primrose Way Garden, we have Epilobium ciliatum growing there. I did not plant it, but we do have creatures spreading it for us. So here we have an Anthrophora bee undoubtedly helping to spread this plant. And you can see she's going for the nectar. She's got her mouth part ready for her tongue to come out. And you can see that her mouth parts almost are exactly the same shape as this flower. So again, bees and plants have evolved together so that they just fit together, with her mouth almost being the exact same shape as the place where the nectar is hiding down in the bottom there. And in California, we have so many different plant communities. We have coastal scrub, we have oak chaparral, desert, redwood forest, and so forth. And remember I said plant communities are a function of the pollinators that live in them. So when you see plants blooming, when you see blossoms, there are bees there because those flowers depend on those bees to help them make seeds. And so what you want to do, whatever your environment is, whether you live in a coastal scrub area, oak chaparral, whichever, you want to aim for the majority of your native plants in your garden to be local species appropriate for your plant community. So this plant community is on the northern tip of the Point Reyes seashore, and we have yellow lupin growing here. We have the coastal form of our poppy, and then we have beautiful Cirsium occidentale, the cobweb thistle, super important in the environment. And then we have that looks to be like a little coyote bush in here. And all those are there because of the bees. And so let's talk about those things that attract those pollinators, the plants that they use. And we have a lot to choose from in California. We have almost 8,000 species of plants, some found nowhere else on the planet, more than any other state in the United States. We are a biodiversity hotspot here in California, one of only about 30 on the planet. The plants have abundant ecological benefits. They support wildlife as well as insects like pollinators and water conservation. Many species are drought tolerant. So the plants fulfill a number of different great functions. You get a many-fold effect here. And we know that insect species, including pollinators, are declining worldwide. And in some areas of the world, insect species have declined up to 70%. And this is rather busy, but how do you pack in 8 years of observation? I wanted to make a point about some different kinds of bees here. So in this section here, I'm showing what's called a leaf cutter bee. And I know it's a leaf cutter because she has a very distinctive abdomen where she collects pollen. And she goes to a lot of different kinds of flowers. She is a generalist. She'll go to a lot of different kinds. Up in this corner, we have bumblebees going to, again, a lot of different kinds of flowers. Bumblebees are generalist. We're showing, again, more bumblebees down here going to a lot of different kinds of flowers. And then in the center here, I'm showing, this is Eriogonum latifolium, which is Eriogonum fasciculatum, I'm sorry. It's one of our native buckwheats. The native buckwheat attracts a lot of different kinds of insects. So it's a keystone species. We've got hair streak butterflies, we've got skippers, we've got little milkweed bugs. I believe that's what that is. We also have bumblebees, we have flies. Lots of different insects will end up on that plant, which is always really fun to watch because lots happens there, a lot of bug dramas. Here we have another plant over here. This is Perideridia gardnerii, I think, otherwise known as yampa, and it's the larval food source for the swallowtail butterfly. There's a larva there, but it's also super attractive to a lot of different insects, flies, bumblebees, wasps, other kinds of bees. Same with asters. Asters are super important in the environment, attracting and feeding all kinds of bee species, butterflies, flies, and so forth. And then down the center, we have poppies. Poppies are a great pollen source for a lot of different kinds of bees and other insects. What to plant? So, there are a lot of different plants, as I mentioned. This is my go-to resource for finding plants. And this is the CalScape database where they have listed 7,984 plants native to California. And you can find out more about CalScape. You can find nurseries, design and inspiration, which gives you information about how to mimic nature for doing really innovative ways to water. And they tell you how to water things in, how to dig holes, everything that you need to know about planting a garden, with even some templates. So if you have nothing and want to try your hand at designing, they have an easy template that you can use. And then butterflies, they talk about host plants for different butterfly species. And you can search by name or you can search by location. So you can look to see in your address, in your county, what is native and what grows there. And they have everything listed, all plants, and then they break it down for you, trees, shrubs, perennials, and so forth. So my go-to source for finding everything native plant related. Now, in terms of keystone species, and this looks really busy, so don't get scared, but this just is done by the National Wildlife Federation, where they talk about keystone native plants, and they do it for different ecoregions across the United States. Here in Mediterranean California, this is ecoregion 11, they talk about two types of keystone plants. They have host plants that feed caterpillars, and approximately 90% of butterflies and moths, and 90% of butterflies and moths. So host plants for caterpillars, but then they talk about plants that feed specialist bees who only eat pollen from specific plants. Keystone plants for native bees feed both specialist bees and the generalist bees. So the specialist bees very focused on one kind of plant. The generalists don't really care too much. They like to choose from among various things. And if we pop over here, this shows the top 30 native host plants for pollen specialist bees. And these two, this is a screenshot that I've taken from the website here. There are a couple of PDFs. You can print them out and keep them for handy reference, or just keep a screenshot on your phone. And then they talk about the different plants that you can have and the number of pollen specialists, bee species relying on that plant. One of the more amazing ones that I find is the helianthus, the sunflower. And we do have a native sunflower here in California. 91, no, 81. You see, no, 81, really small type. 81 pollen specialists. So if you want to grow sunflowers, super easy, and then so on and so forth. We have more than half of these plants in our gardens, so trying to cover all the bases for those pollen specialists. There's other resources that you can find. An excellent resource here is 222 pages that Jeffrey Caldwell put together. It's notes on native plant species that are associated with use by different bee and insect species. And you can find this on various Facebook pages. I think if you just Google the Bee and Insect Associate to San Francisco Bay Region's Plants 8.0, you can find this on the web. And you can also find it at the California Native Plant Society. So it's just really interesting reading if you want to spend a few afternoons doing that. And here we have, this is in my home garden, the bumblebee, the yellow-faced bumblebee again, Bombus vassnesenskyii, on the Carpentaria californica, which is blooming right now with these gigantic, beautiful white blossoms. They kind of look like fried eggs with the yellow yolk there and the egg white out towards the periphery. So plants are super important. Life on Earth would not be possible without them. And they are the primary producers of food and the basis of food webs. So we're going to talk about food here. And energy from the sun is then converted by plants. That's then eaten by insects, and those insects get fed to baby birds. And so here on planet Earth, 37% of animal species are plant-eating insects. It's not quite half, it's more than a third of animals on the entire planet are eating the plants. And as a rule, native insects only eat the native plants they evolved with. So insects are very picky eaters. They only like specific things, and so they just won't eat non-native plants. So plants that efficiently channel the sun's energy into the food web in ways that other plants can't are likely to be keystone species. So like those sunflowers, being able to channel that sun's energy to 81 different pollen specialist bees. That's a keystone species. What are the implications of this? Plants, native plants as food. Because the native plants will attract a variety of native pollinators and other insects, using best practices will help complete their life cycles. Okay, you want these creatures not to come to your yard or your plants to die, but to live, to mate, to create more of their beautiful offspring and keep the cycle going so that we can have more plants and more diversity and more beauty that these insects create. So we're going to talk about plants and habitat because these two things are very, very closely related. We're going to talk about food. We're going to talk about water and moisture. We're going to talk about shelter and nesting sites and how we can optimize these components to make a pollinator habitat as productive and as resilient as possible. And all of these things will help us also save water. So it's like you're doing like 8 things at once. So native plants can really help you optimize the way that you save water, and help the planet at the same time. And here we have some nice larvae and another big, beautiful carpenter bee feeding on a verbena, which is blooming right now. Very lovely, fragrant shrub. So let's talk about food for pollinators. Some planting basics about pollinator plants. And here we have Eriogonum fasciculatum. Remember, I said it really appeals to a lot of different creatures, and this is just a blow up of that picture that I showed earlier. And what we want to consider are the temporal patterns of foraging. What that means is over time. So what happens over time in terms of the way insects are rummaging around for food. So there's the whole season, which is the whole year. And so your plant palette, what you offer up at your plant buffet, should include at least 3 species of each of the things that bloom early during the winter, things that bloom middle of the season, and things that bloom late. So for a minimum of 9 species. Pollinators emerge at different times during the year, so providing overlapping bloom times will keep them foraging in the garden much longer. And also over the course of the day, you want to include plants that bloom early in the day as well as night. Some bees are active during low light conditions or during the cooler temperatures in the morning and the evening. So, and some plants only bloom at night. So again, um, a lot of insects also are running around at nighttime. So for every species of butterfly on the planet, there are 19 species of moths. And what are those moths doing at night? They are pollinating plants and doing other things that moths do, mating and looking for territory and migrating. So another pollinator planting basic, you want to consider a diversity of plant species. Remember, we talked about 9 minimum with overlapping bloom times. It's super important to provide a diversity of blooms because that will attract a variety and a diversity of pollinators and other insects. So a garden with at least 20 different types of blooming plants is ideal for attracting a diversity of pollinators. Some studies indicate 60 to 80 species is even better for attracting diverse pollinators. And so basically what you want to do is start with some keystone species and then just keep adding plants year by year, because I don't know if anybody can plant 80 species in one year. It just takes time. So you can add a few every year. And before you know it, after 3 or 4 years, you're up to like 40 or 50 species. And so adding more native plant species over time during the planting season helps you build a more resilient diversity over time. You can leave some areas of bare dirt with morning sun or afternoon shade is good for those ground dwelling bees because 70% of native bees nest underground, and smaller bees like to nest as close as possible to those food sources. And this is at the Hopkins Avenue Pollinator Garden with some different offerings there for the native bees. And something else about bees, let's consider what they see. Most bees don't see red, but can see ultraviolet. And in general, what do these colors mean to different insects? Blue and purple means nectar, and nectar means sugar. And so blue flowers are preferred. Blue is a very interesting color because bees remember things about the blue flowers more than they do some other colors. Interesting studies done about bee psychology and bee behavior in terms of their preferences. White and yellow in general to bees mean pollen. Some flowers have ultraviolet patterns that we can't see, and so blue, white, and yellow will be very attractive to bees. And flowers with petals or a globe shape and orientation patterns, the stripes on flowers that guide them to the nectar, help a bee to land and to find its way to that nectar reward because sugar is good. And so here we have another bee, the Habropoda depressa, the California mountain digger bee on Verbena lilacina, delamina at the Gwynda Street Garden. And I have this in a lot of our gardens because it's just such a reliable bloomer. Every year you can cut it back and it will grow back nicely. If it starts to look woody, you can cut it back once or twice every like 3 years or so. And they have these fragrant kind of spicy cinnamon floral blossom smells. It's just very nice. And so you can see she doesn't look anything like a honeybee. Honeybees aren't native. So we see all kinds of interesting creatures in our gardens. So let's talk about pollen. Uh, pollen carries the male genes of plants. Um, Sometimes people call pollen plant sperm, but that's what it is. And few insects other than bees rely on pollen as a sole protein source to feed their larvae. Bees are vegetarians. Many other insects eat other insects. It's pretty carnivorous out there. And so a lot of other insects are looking for insects to feed their offspring, to feed their larvae. Bees don't do that. Early on in bee evolution, they decided that it was better not to fight their food to feed their offspring, and pollen didn't fight. So um, it worked out in the bee's favor to turn vegetarian. Uh, Pollen as a protein source varies in terms of protein content from 2.5 to about 61% protein. It contains fats, starches, vitamins, and minerals, and it's very stable. It allows it to persist for thousands of years. The outer um, shell is very hard, and not all pollen is created equally. We talked about pollen specialists. Bee species vary in their ability to digest different pollens. Remember that shell on the pollen is really hard, and so being able to break that shell down varies among bee species. And bees that are raised on that non-host pollen will fail to survive. So it's really important to plant pollen plants for those specialist bees. And pollen comes in many colors. It can be blue, it can be white, it can be orange, yellow. Lots of different colors, and that color comes from the sticky fatty or lipid coating called the pollen kit, and that's made up of saturated and unsaturated fats or lipids, carotenoids, those vitamin A's, flavonoids, proteins, and carbohydrates. And that part is easily digestible. And it also may play a role in cloud formation because it goes up into the atmosphere and water droplets can form on pollen. So there's all kinds of interesting connections with pollen and not just feeding um, feeding bees and other insects. And here we have again the yellow-faced bumblebee. She has a longer tongue and she prefers those tubular flowers because the tubular flower can help maintain the liquidity of nectar, so it's easier to suck up through a longer tongue. If you imagine sucking up a thick milkshake through a long straw, it's the same kind of thing for a bumblebee. And she prefers the higher uh, protein pollen because she has to make big bees because the bumblebees are not small; they're pretty hefty, and so she's feeding on a whole bunch of different things here, from poppies to uh, monardella to other things. Some other floral resources for bees, nectar and other substances. So nectar, that's the moisture. Okay, nectar is a liquid, but it is a source of sugar, and all kinds of sugar. It's not just sucrose, but it's glucose, fructose, maltose, and so forth in varying proportions and concentrations. So lots of different tasting sugar out there. And the proportions and the presence of each type of sugar varies from and within species to species. And as I mentioned before, less concentrated nectar is easier for those long-tongued bees to drink. Also contains water, some amino acids, which can influence the taste of the nectar, antioxidants, minerals, and contains scents to attract pollinators. And nectar secretion increases with pollinator visits and then declines after pollination and is frequently reabsorbed into the plant. And the plant structure then preserves that viscosity with those tubular flowers keeping that nectar from evaporating and becoming thicker. And nectar also, or flowers also have resin and oil, and that's used by some bees to waterproof their brood cells because when they make a nest, they will lay an egg, put pollen and nectar mixed together in a little loaf, and then they seal them into a chamber using resins and oils that they find. Sometimes they use leaves to line their nest with. Um, and all those different things may have antimicrobial properties to help protect the developing bee larva. So they choose plants based on making sure that it's going to help their babies to uh, go through their various instars, various cycles, so that they can turn into a bee eventually. And nectar is the fuel for flight and other behaviors in the ecosystem. And here's a variety of species, Nectarine unmoderdella villosa. We have, of course, bumblebees, skipper butterflies, flies. You can always tell because they have these little short antennae here, um, and so forth. So nectar is the reward that flowers provide because flowers provide protein, but they also have to make it a little bit more tasty. And so here we have Bombus vosnesenskyii nectarine on the beautiful Cirsium occidentale, var occidentale, the copper thistle. Such a great plant in the environment. And you can see she's just going crazy, just trying to get in there to get to that nectar. And, you know, if you have this plant in your garden, it's very entertaining. Lots of bees love that plant. Not only that, it is the larval food source for the painted lady butterfly, as well as providing thistle seeds then for finches. So the connections to other species are apparent in this plant as well. So plants aren't decorations. I mean, they can be decorative. They can be very pretty and smell nice. Oops, sorry. And so that means that the native plants, again, will attract those many native pollinators and other insects and in turn, birds. So whenever I go to the nursery, I'm looking for specific plants, but I always try to find a plant that has holes in the leaves because I know that larvae have been eating it. And that way I know it's not going to just sit rent free in the garden and not give anything back. If the plant in the nursery, if it looks perfect, I don't want it generally. I mean, it has a nice form and doesn't look, like too chewed up, but it has some chewing on it. Then I know that chances are I'm going to bring home a larva or a butterfly of some kind. And so I get a twofer in that regard. So again, the ability to carry pollen. So here we have different ways that bees carry pollen. And this is important in a moment. I'll tell you why. We have the legs or the abdomens. Here we have the legs on the Melissoides bee on Aster chilensis. She's got these really fuzzy back legs where she packs pollen in to take back to the nest. And here we have the leafcutter bee, the Megachilidae. You can see she's got a fuzzy abdomen. So different fuzzy places in which to carry pollen. And so they have specialized hairs in these areas, and that holds the pollen for transport. Other bees have areas on their hind legs that are bare, flattened or slightly concave, the corbicula or pollen basket, which are surrounded by hairs, and pollen is then groomed into these areas. Some bees also carry pollen internally back. And so imagine a bee flying from flower to flower, packing it on, really trying to maximize her time, getting as much as possible. If you can minimize the distance that they have between flowers and nest, that makes it much more efficient for her to get what she needs to go back to provision a nest. And then she can make more babies because she's not spending a lot of time commuting. Bees can certainly fly longer distances, but many bees prefer to travel between 150 feet to 1,500 feet between nests and flowers. The shorter the distance to the nest, the better, which means that if you have an abundance of blooms in your yard, you're going to have bees nesting in your yard. And that's how you know that you're being really successful, is if you have active nests for bees. Some of the plants that I like to use, I'm going to give you some specific examples and reasons why. And um, some are actually cultivars. And I try to vet the cultivars to make sure that they are providing nectar, that they are providing those larval resources for other things. So they have to really, the plants have to prove themselves. And so one that I really like is Arctostaphylos densiflora, Howard McMinn. This blooms in January, which is that early bloomer, because that's when the bumblebees come out, is in wintertime. And bumblebees come out when it's cold because they can maintain their body temperatures. They're fuzzy and they can warm up and get that nectar of those early blooming flowers. And Arctostaphylos species provide, they support 78 caterpillar species and 13 pollen specialist bee species, also providing berries, nectar, and shelter for many other organisms. So the plants have to prove themselves. And I know this because I spend a lot of time photographing these insects that are using these plants. Another great plant that I love, 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 super easy, low maintenance plants with 8 gardens. I really try to hone my plant decision making down to some good ones. Kind of an early to mid bloomer are the Ceanothus species. This is one that I really like. This is Ceanothus maritima, valley violet. It's evergreen. That means it doesn't drop all its leaves at once, just a little bit at a time. With blue blooms starting in January, and they will continue blooming for weeks. Very low water used, and it's also larval host for dozens of butterfly and moth species. And here we have, this is actually Bombus melanopygus, the black-tailed bumblebee. You can see she's got her tongue out because she's looking for that nectar. And the black-tailed bumblebees actually come out a little earlier than the yellow-face bumblebees do. So this is a great plant for them as well. But here's, if I had to say, hands down, my favorite pollinator plant, if you can choose just one plant, this plant will get to be about 4 to 5 feet wide, maybe about 3 to 4 feet tall, but then you can like cut it way back, in January when it's done blooming, before the new growth comes out, is Encelia californica. This is a powerhouse plant for pollen specialists and a larval host for moths and butterflies. And this thing blooms abundantly for months. And so we have everything from flies to skippers to Shifalud there to other larvae eating things. We've got bees. You can see she's getting ready with her beak out for some nectar. We've got melissoides here. We've got leaf cutters. And then personally, what I think is some of the most beautiful osmia, the orchard bees here, just what I think this is. Incredible iridescent, sort of beautiful peacock green color. And then this is actually a male leaf cutter bee. And these male leaf cutter bees, and all males will patrol an area waiting for the females to come in. So if you want to see a lot of insect drama, plant one of these and just go out in the sunny afternoon and just watch the drama unfold. Hands down, my favorite pollinator plant. Really a great sort of mid-season bloomer that will bloom starting now until at least November. So really just a great plant. Other plants that we have in our gardens, so many to choose from. Not all of these are keystone species. These are perennials. I always tell people if you can get a tree or a shrub first to start with, and then work the perennials in, that's usually better. but a lot of things. But those Helianthus species are good keystone species for those specialist pollen uh, bees. Some annuals. And annuals are a great way to really get into native plants. It's very accessible because seeds are cheap and you can really get a lot. Uh, Annuals, that means they complete their life cycle in a single year. They provide a huge variety of floral resources. And annuals actually are the most under threat natives from competitions from non-native grasses. And there's a huge variety of annual plants that you can plant that are not typically available in nurseries. You can get early color from them. Many are super easy and affordable from seed with a long bloom time. If you do successive sowing, so sow the seeds like 1 week, wait a couple more weeks, sow some more, you can extend bloom time. And some are very seedy, so you can harvest a lot of spare surplus seed to gather and then give to other people, so share the abundance. Low growing annuals can be layered under taller shrubs, so you can get some complexity into the environment. Many are easy to grow in pots. If you don't have a garden space, you can access the annual goodness by just planting a pot full. And you preserve genetic diversity when you grow things from seeds, because if you grow things from cuttings, you're basically cloning plants, and that does not increase genetic diversity. My three top plants for pollinators are poppies, hands down for pollen. Poppies do not produce any nectar, they only produce pollen. And so we call these the pollen bowl. And you will see bees rolling themselves around in these flowers, and they're actually buzz pollinated. So non-native honeybees typically are not attracted to these flowers. Gilia capitata, the globe gilia, super easy to grow and will be very seedy, reseeds itself readily. Provides both pollen and nectar. You can see there's her mouth part there. And then if you want to see a lot of bumblebees, another annual, super easy, Phacelia tennessetifolia. And the Phacelia family, again, or the Phacelia genus rather, provides a lot of pollen specialists, their resources. The pollen here is blue, so it's really interesting to see blue pollen on the bees, and has a very high quality nectar, very easy to sow in place and reseeds itself. So you sow it once and you will have it forever. Very attractive to bees. Um, it's just always covered. It's blooming right now. And just a great plant overall. Another one that I like to use for showy purposes, Clarkia amoena. This is very easy from seed. It reseeds with a long bloom season. And I like to show this picture because I think it's pretty, but it shows the nectar guides on the flowers on these petals. So you get like this beautiful kind of pale pink with a darker pink nectar guide. And then you get like a different color pink with a darker pink nectar guide. And then you get the reverse of that with a darker pink and then a lighter nectar guide in there. So lots of variation, a wine colored one down here. And what you can do if you like any one of these is then collect seeds from a color form that you really like and just get one color in your garden if you wanted to then sort of paint with the colors of the flowers. Some of the basic things about how you should plant: provide abundance. Masses of plants. The planting should occur in masses of a single species, at least 3 feet or more in diameter to enhance foraging efficiency. And you want to provide more than you think that they could ever use because they'll use a lot. In one study, 85% of 41 species required all the pollen from more than 30 flowers for one larva. Other species species required all the pollen from over 1,000 flowers to make one bee. So more is better. And so if you can plant something that will be 3 feet in diameter, or plant a number of different plants that can spread out to be 3 feet at least in diameter, that's good. It's also a really good visual cue for insects. They can see this from a mile away. They don't want to go that far, but it makes it very efficient so they don't have to go far distances between plants if they can just stay in one area and take care of all of their needs. That's very efficient for them. Some of the best practices now that we've got bees and other species in our gardens, one of the things that we want to provide them is a place where they can lay their eggs and then complete their life cycles and get that next generation going. And complexity in the habitat provides places for nesting and shelter. And complexity is a nicer word than messiness, but messiness is super productive and super niche oriented for insects. If you can create some piles of brush, some piles of leaves, and leave those in place, that is what nature wants. Nature loves things that are messy, or as we like to say, as humans like to say, complex. And so, and insects will find all kinds of places to nest. And so this leaf cutter bee surprised me. This is in my home garden. I use bamboo, bamboo stakes, which are hollow. And that's where she was laying her eggs. Which drives home a point about stems. Many stems are hollow, and you have a lot of stem nesters. So just be aware that whenever you have a hollow stem, chances are you're going to have insects laying their eggs in it in the bottom foot or so. So if you're pruning things, leave about a foot so that you can have those stem nesters lay eggs. And so this is at the Gwenda Street Garden. I created a small pile of logs, and it's not super messy, but it's not super like organized. So it's kind of a middle ground, but it has a lot of leaf litter on it. So it provides a lot of little niches for a lot of different organisms. Pruning decisions again. I always say, don't be in a rush to prune. Nature's not in a rush to do what she wants to do. She's been taking her time for millions of years. You should take your time as well. And, just let nature show you what her purpose is for things. And so one purpose for a dried stem is that it provides a place for male bees to have a nap, because they got to take a break from pursuing and wooing the lady bees. And so they don't have nests to sleep in at night. So sometimes they'll sleep inside of flowers or on stems, and they will latch on with their mouth parts there so that they can just kind of relax. I guess the mouth can just automatically just latch on to these stems, and they can just take a nap. And so this is the Anthrophora species. He's hanging out here, just resting up for his next courtship round. Bare soil is important as well. Most native bees nest underground, about 70%. So what you want to look for are those low-flying, buzzing activities at ground level, and then follow those insects to their burrow. When you have nesting behavior, that means you have a successful habitat. So these little holes in the ground, and they can go quite deep. They can go down several feet. And below are the pictures of a bee burrow, above here with the colony residence. This is at the Island Drive Garden. And we observe the same species foraging on the flowers in this habitat. And they don't go very far because they don't have to. There's plenty for them to eat there, a lot of abundance. And those small bees, they prefer not to go very far for food. And so in this space where we know that we have a colony, we don't dig holes for plants. We basically seed things in or plant things that spread by runners so we don't disturb the soil structure. And it's a pretty small area, so we're not giving up a lot. It's about 3 foot by 3 foot. So observation, look before you dig, don't have to call 811 to find what's happening. It's just if you see this sort of thing going on and you see insects crawling along the ground, then you know we have nesting going on. Like I mentioned before, many creatures will shelter inside those nests. So in your pruning decisions, I try not to prune until I absolutely have to prune, which is usually never, or once a year for very specific plants. But those plants, you know, they provide so much shelter for these creatures. And so if we do prune, we'll leave the stems in piles so those stems can be used. And when we do generally prune stems, it's after those stems are breaking down, there aren't any seeds left, and that can take months. And there isn't any fluff that the hummingbirds are using to make their nests with. So really let nature be your guide. Really wait and see what the purposes that nature has for those various resources. Leave the leaves in place. This is from the Xerces Society. Bumblebee queens overwinter in leaf piles, especially underneath our valley oak that drops all her leaves in the fall. Makes a nice pile. Just leave them there. And that's where she hangs out before she starts a new colony the next year. Those best practices, native gardens with native plants are less maintenance than a non-native garden with a lawn. There's no mowing involved. Basically, your main work in a garden will be just weeding, keeping the weeds at bay. And when you're planting, plant during the cool, rainy season, which is almost over for the year. But to establish the plants, you want to irrigate them about once a week, really deeply to help those roots find moisture. And this is all talked about on the Calscape website. Again, prune sparingly, fertilizing and amending, not really necessary. So if you have hard clay soil, what I suggest to people is a year before you plant anything, put about 6 inches of mulch down and then plant in the fall, and that ground will be a lot easier to dig into. And it will also help control weeds, and then leave the leaves in place for mulch, because plants with their leaves that they drop, that's their fertilizer. They create their own fertilizer. Don't use leaf blowers in planted areas. Absolutely no reason to do that, because those pollinators that are eating the pollinator plants will hide out in the leaf litter under plants. And you absolutely do not have to blow leaves out from under plants. It's bad for the soil, it's bad for the insects, and it can compact the soil, which makes it so that water doesn't like soak in, it will run off. And obviously don't use pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides. Those can get into the soil too and affect those bee larvae from developing in certain ways. So, final thoughts. As your understanding of how planting California natives helps those pollinators, so does your ability to optimize the power of your native plant garden, leading to an abundance of life, as well as enhancing your role in caring for nature's complex beauty. And with that, I would be happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Juanita. Once again, just such an informative presentation, and my paper is full, which you can't see. Again, plant native buckwheat, valley violet, and the Encilia californica. Definitely going to look into those.
That plant is such a hot spot, and the drama that I see on that plant every year, it's crazy. The skipper butterflies alone, it will be, my plants are always covered in butterflies. It's crazy how good that is.
I'm so excited. So we do have a hand up. So Susie, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Susie? Let's see. Okay. Susie asked a question in the Q&A. Will this
Oh,
be
no way.
available? Will this recording be available? Yes, it will. I will email it to everyone who participated in the webinar tonight after the end of the webinar. So you can definitely rewatch this later. Okay, any other questions? Oh, for the Ensalia californica, I wanted to ask if that prefers sun or shade or part sun, part shade. Juanita.
What was that question
Oh,
again?
sorry. I was asking if the Ensalia californica, it's a tough one to say, prefers all sun, all shade, part sun, part shade.
So mine, I have it in full sun, but it has late afternoon shade.
Okay.
Um, and insects for the most part take on the temperature of the ambient environment. And so being in the sunshine is helpful for them because they can, move around and do their things. Yeah, and that plant, yeah, it's super easy. It's pretty low water use. And, once a year, it, like after it's done blooming, like late December, that's when I'll like give it a hard prune because it's very vigorous and will uh, just keep on producing blooms. I mean, thousands of blooms on this plant. It's always bright, cheery to look at. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think it rivals the buckwheat in terms of the drama that you see on it.
That's too funny. We do have another question. Does Sunnyvale have a seed library? I am not familiar with the seed library. Juanita, are you, since you're in the gardening community more than I am?
Um, I haven't seen anything there, but I do know that Palo Alto's Rinconada Library has a little seed library where they offer those things. Um, People can pick up seeds there. Um, but seeds are pretty easy to get a hold of. There are several different places to buy them. There's like some of my favorite places are like Larner Seeds up in Bolinas. You can order them online. Seed Hunt, which is another good one. And they all like have like different things that you can get. And the native plant gardens have lots of seeds. So, you know, poppy seeds are so prolific. If people were to see a seed poppy pod that they liked, um, you know, they could take that home with them.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much abundance in that. So, but yeah, but Sunnyvale should have a seed library, I think.
I know, I think so. That's something I'm gonna have to look into, or having some type of seed sharing party,
Yes.
once every spring or something. I like that idea. We do have another question. Planting in groups of 3 feet by 3 feet is okay, or must be circle or square type of diameter?
No, I mean, the bees, as long as things are close together, 3 feet by 3 feet is just kind of like the mass. So you can imagine like stretching that out. So they can still go from flower to flower.
Mm.
So there's no particular shape that's really necessary. That's a great question though.
Hmm. Great. Any other questions for Juanita while we have her? We did receive a thank you very much, Juanita. So I thought you should
Yes,
hear that. Not sure if you saw
yes,
that.
yes, I did. And you're welcome. Love it.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I don't want to hang up just yet. I want to give
I
a couple
know.
more
I'm
minutes.
hoping that somebody has like a burning question.
Yeah.
Now is the chance to. Oh, I could always mention that I'm always looking for volunteers.
Mm.
Yes,
Th-
and they can contact me through my website, which is the primrosewaypollinatorgarden.com. because my volunteers, not only do they get a vest with our logo on it and a hat with our logo on it, but they have access to all kinds of seeds and plants because the
Ooh.
gardens are extremely productive. And one year I harvested like 4 dozen white sage plants. I was giving these, I was like throwing these to people. Here, take one, take one. So volunteers get goodies and get to see all the beauty and have fun. And it's a great group of people uh, that I have helping me.
You might be hearing from me, Juanita. Once I heard seeds and plants, I got excited. So
Oh,
I'll
absolutely.
definitely include Juanita's the website in the follow-up email, along with the resources Juanita mentioned and the recording, of course. The Sunnyvale gardening community does have Sunnyvale seed library group on Nextdoor. Ooh, good to know. I wonder which community garden. There's the Charles Street Community Garden across from City Hall. Is it that one that you're thinking of, or is it a different one? But that's good to know either way. Charles Street. Okay, good to know. Awesome. Any other questions? I think that might be everything, Juanita. Thank you so much once again. It was a very informative presentation, and I look forward to getting my hands dirty in my garden and attracting some pollinators.
Very good. Thank you, Izzy. Really, it was really fun. I love talking about it. It's just, it's not just abundance of flowers and plants, but it's an abundance of information. And
Mm,
so, as we were talking about this, ahead of the seminar, um, my sort of goal is always to become a better designer. And so letting nature kind of inform me how to do that. I think I have become a better designer. So now my goal is to create abundance and resiliency,
mm.
which is I don't think they teach that in school, at least not when I went to landscape architecture school. So it's always, something new every time I go out to the gardens, even if it's like literally 15 minutes later, I always see something new.
Oh, that's so exciting. I'm gonna have to come take a look. You talk so
I'll
highly
give you
of
a
them.
tour. Yes.
Yeah, I would love that. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Juanita. Thank you for everyone for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you again sometime soon. Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Thank you.